This week we're looking at two firsts in the Nativity story according to Luke. Luke's account stresses heavily in chapter 1 the virgin status of Mary leading up to the birth of Jesus. And we're going to see that as our second first in our look at two firsts today. But first, let's get to the first. This is Luke chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 from the ESV. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So our first is the first registration or census while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Let's take a look at it in Koine. Aute apographe prote ageneto. Hegemonuontos, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Hegemonuontos tes Surias Corianiu. This was the first registration or census, and then we get this genitive absolute hegemonuontos tes Surias Corianiu. So while Quirinius was governing Syria is the genitive absolute. So the issue at hand for us is the first registration, the first counting, the head count of the empire during Quirinius's governorship in Syria. First here, prote is a superlative. There can only be one first counting of the people. Right? Anyone after that is not the first. There can be a first during Quirinius's governorship. There can be a first during the reign of Caesar. There can be a number of different kinds of firsts, but within the category, there can only be one first, right? That's a superlative. In classical Greek, a superlative always required at least three of something. And that makes sense, right? We have good, better, and best. You have to have at least three to get to best. If there's only two, you would expect good and better, or better, wouldn't even be better and best if it's between two. But in the Koine period, in the New Testament time, much like in English, superlatives loosened up and started to be used like comparatives, like we do in English frequently. It's not that it's correct that we do that, but we do tend to use superlatives as comparatives. So for instance, I have 3 children. My eldest child is my daughter. If I refer to my elder son or my older son as my eldest son, I'm using the superlative eldest like a comparative because I only have 2 sons. I have an elder son and a younger son. I don't have an eldest son. My eldest child is my daughter. See how that works? So to use the term eldest about my older son is to use the superlative like a comparative. That's not uncommon at the time that the New Testament is written. Why am I stressing this? Why are we talking about this? Well, here's a couple of things that we know from history. Ussher's chronology made an error, and our division of BC and AD is wrongly dated. So Herod the Great died in 4 BC. Of this, we're virtually certain. If Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, then the latest that Jesus can be born is 4 BC. So our AD BC break is in the wrong place thanks to Ussher's chronology. We also know that Quirinius, governing Syria, places his first census in the year 6 or 7 AD. So if Jesus is born in 4 BC and the first census of Quirinius while governing Syria is 6 to 7 AD, we have ourselves a roughly 10-year time gap, right, that we have to contend with. So we have some possibilities. Either very meticulous Luke just got this wrong, or perhaps the superlative prote is not being used as a superlative, but as a comparative to some other censuses. But still, the dating gives us a big problem there. Or there's a third solution that people have tried to suggest to sort of bail Luke out and make sure that no one can point to a chronological error in the account. And that third option is to say that prote is being used adverbially and is modifying the reign of Quirinius as governor of Syria. So, in other words, we would then translate it before the first, this was the first census, this was the census before Quirinius was governing Syria. I'm going to pop the slide back up. The problem with that is hegemoniuontas tes Surias Quiriniu is a genitive absolute, and prote here is very obviously not a part of that genitive absolute. So prote is not modifying as an adverb the participle hegemoniuontas, right? It just isn't. So that notion fails grammatically. It's not saying this was the first census before Quirinius was governing Syria. So we can set that aside. Now let's get to the ugly part, the uncomfortable part. There is no available resolution to this question. The first census in what regard? Is it the first census or the first registration that was proclaimed by Augustus? Nobody knows for sure. What we're going to need is some newly unearthed historical evidence to reconcile this challenge. So what's your homework? Get out and dig in the dirt, find some archaeological or otherwise historical evidence, and clear this thing up for everyone. But other than that, let's set aside the first of the firsts and move on to the second first. Here we get in verses 3 through 5, Luke chapter 2, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. We're almost there. Let's carry on with verses 6 and 7. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. All right, let's take a look at this phrase in Greek. Kai eteken ton huion autes ton prototokon. Kai eteken, and she gave birth ton huion to the son, autes of her, to her son. Which son? Ton prototokon, the firstborn. So here we have the adjective prototokon in the second attributive position, the son of her, the firstborn one. So prototokon here in this verse is the only time that it occurs in the New Testament where it is unquestionably being used chronologically. We're talking about birth order. So most of the time when we see this word, it's being used figuratively about Jesus. It's being used to describe a preferred child, to refer to one who's going to be the inheritor. This is a role in the family, but here it is very clearly talking about the chronologically firstborn child. Bear in mind, Luke stresses heavily in chapter 1 that this is a virgin birth. This is not a child that is the favored child only. This is her firstborn child that was conceived before she had known a man, right? So it's pretty significant in the way he's using the term in the context of Mary's experience. Also, look at the verb that he chooses, etikin. He's not talking about the child who was begotten by whom. He's not talking about this sort of sanitized, cleaned up version, not virgin, version. He's talking about literal physical childbirth, pushing the child out of her body. And this is significant because it's not being used, prototokon is not being used as a superlative. It's not just a child of many of her children. The word prototokon can be used about an only child. You can be the first and only child. It's not requiring that it's the first of at least three, like classical Greek with a superlative. It's describing the fact that of any children that this woman has given birth to, this is the first time she has given birth. Why does this matter? For several reasons. Luke really, really wants us to know that this is a literal physical birth, that she was a virgin, we're told, that when she travels to Bethlehem with Joseph, she's not his wife, she is betrothed to him. So the terms of the engagement have been set, the marital contract has been set, but she's not a married woman, she's a virgin, she's carrying this child, and during the time of this journey, we're told that the days of her pregnancy were fulfilled. In other words, she reached full term in this pregnancy, and she literally, physically gave birth to a son. What kind of son? Ton prototokon, the firstborn son. There are people who have a belief in the perpetual virginity of Mary, okay? They want Mary to have not only had a virgin birth, but had a virgin life and death. And it's important when we look at this adjective, prototokon, firstborn, that this word, because it can mean first and only, could possibly say that this is a perpetual virgin, but it in no way says that she's a perpetual virgin. So it neither proves nor disproves that belief. What it does say, what the culmination of the phrase says, is this woman who was known to be a virgin, an unmarried woman prior to this birth, gave physical birth to a son, and this was the first time she had given birth. Whether she gave birth times after that, this verse does not speak to. Okay, so what do we have here today in the nativity story in Luke? We have two firsts, a first census, a first registration of the citizenry that causes some challenges for us when it comes to chronology and dating. Don't forget, go dig in the sand, go dig in the history, and solve this problem for us. And the second first is the order of the birth of Jesus. This is a firstborn son in regard to Mary, his mother. And that is what we know for sure from this verse. Anything else you want to gather, you're going to have to gather elsewhere. But as far as Luke tells us, in chapter 2, verses 1 through 6 and 7, behold, the virgin was with child, and when the fullness of days came, she gave birth to her firstborn son, swallowed him in a cloth, laid him in a manger, because there was no room in the inn. So there you have it. Merry Christmas, and see you next time.